We are a group of artists, filmmakers, writers, curators who are gathered here from India, China and Nepal, some of us coming as well from the United States. And we're here actually to do some exploration around this region, particularly looking at the ways in which we might connect to an initiative at the India-China Institute around sacred landscapes. And we're looking at the place of the arts, or the ways in which the arts might enter this story.
On the first day, we walked from Tamil to Basantapur. This walk was led by Ravi Thapa. He's a very famous writer based in Kathmandu and also the co-founder and the editor of the literary magazine called La.lit. The second half of the walk in Basantapur was led by Ashmina Ranjit, a conceptual artist, another top artist in Nepal. And both Ravi and Ashmina, they are the co-organizers of this Kailash Cartographies meeting here in Kathmandu with the India-China Institute. So Ravi shared more of a research-based experience and knowledge to the group, whereas Ashmina's was more personal. She grew up in Basantapur. She spent most of her life in Basantapur, and so it was more reflective but also experiential information sharing.
The main purpose of this workshop really has basically three objectives. The broad objective is by bringing creative people in one place from these countries, what can we learn about India-China story? What can we learn about big questions confronting us as human beings? Whether it's around climate change, or whether it's around deep questions related to sustainability, landscapes, intersection of religion and ecology. These are the kinds of questions that this group of people who have gathered here were exploring, engaging with, and basically trying to figure out how we as creative people can shed more light, more clarity on these complex questions that face humanity.
The second day of the workshop on Monday, we went to Pashupati. The walk was from Pashupati to Bodh. So half of the group who are from India went inside the Pashupati temple because that was allowed, whereas others, for various reasons, including religious reasons, they actually stayed outside of the temple and were observing the people going in and out, bodies being cremated, people going around the temple, worshipping, and all of that.
So we walk through three landscapes. So the first one is from Pashupati to Bauddha. Okay, so when you go from Pashupati to Bauddha, there are two very sacred sites. So one is Pashupati temple and the other is the Bauddha stupa. So what we actually did was, the conversation we had was A, to understand the history of those places, but secondly also to discuss the mythical origins of those places. But really the discussion we had was basically, when we buy certain offerings, like we make offerings to the temples. So what makes those objects sacred? So what does it mean to have asta, in terms of offering? But also in going back, what do we mean when we say we take a prasad or something that is of the blessing, right? So one is to understand the commercial aspects of those sacred objects. But the second is also to understand how young people perceive sacredness. So you see a lot of young people hanging around these sites. And so for young people, what does sacredness, mean? And the third thing that we also looked at was the water, the forest, all the natural, environments that actually make that place serene or a nice place to visit. The questions are, if it is sacred, why is the river dirty? Right? If it is to be worshipped, then it should be clean. So some of these contemporary issues we looked at.
After Pashupati, that morning we went to Bauddha. The walk was organized in a way for the participants to give an idea of what a Hindu experience and a Buddhist experience would look like, but at the same time also give an idea of how Hindu practices and Hindu traditions coexist with Buddhist traditions, and how all of this come together to create a sacred space and then give you a different idea or different perspective on how sacredness can be understood and actually lived by people regardless of who they are and regardless of what kind of religious background they come from. In Bauddha, people went inside various monasteries. They did a kora of the stupa itself. But one of the most visually intriguing thing for the participants was the damage done to the stupa and the reconstruction effort. On the one hand, it showed the participants that the stupa was badly damaged by the earthquake last year in 2015. But on the other hand, it also showed how the community is coming together to literally lift brick by brick and reconstruct the stupa into something it was before, or even better than before. The third day, on March 22nd, it was a holy day, so it was holy. Midday, we also organized a holy celebration of our own. So we came to NexUs and we poured powders and colored and played with water and all of that. And then from NexUs, we went to Patan Darbar Square. At Patan Darbar Square, not only did we see people throwing water and colors at each other, but also there was this concert and everyone was taking pictures, in jolly mood, really having a good time. So I think that was one of the highlights for the participants, especially the ICI, the India-China Institute Fellows who joined us on the 21st. After the holy celebration, we also had a walk in Patan Darbar Square, and following the walk in Patan, we actually went to this beautiful restaurant called Cafe de Patan, where we were met with Aditya Adhikari. Aditya Adhikari is a political analyst. He had written this book called The Bullet and the Ballot Box, which looks at Maoist revolution in Nepal more from a historical perspective. So he gave us an overview of where Nepal stands today, politically speaking, especially after the earthquake and the recent blockade, but also looking at how a Hindu Nepali kingdom became a federal democratic republic, and how the Maoist transitions affected the government and also affected the political system in the country. Following Aditya Adhikari, we also had another guest speaker, Dr. Mukta Lama. He's an anthropologist, but he has been working on indigenous issues for several years now. And he also gave an overview of how not only indigenous communities, but the marginalized communities have suffered unequal power sharing structure. And also how the marginalized communities have been left out and continue to be marginalized because of the recent constitution that came out in 2015. And then which was followed by Ashok Gurung, our program director, senior director, who gave his observations of the current political state. But I think the evening took an interesting turn when Ashmina Ranjit followed Ashok, sharing that none of the speakers had actually mentioned anything about women, although they were talking about marginalized communities and all of that. So I think that was an interesting point. But the conversation nonetheless was very informative. It was very informal. So everyone was able to share, ask their questions and also learn from the speakers about Nepal and what's happening in the country and the directions it is taking right now. The next day, we had a walk to Swayambhu. The Swayambhu walk was led by Anil Chitrakar and Dina Bangdil. She gave a very good overview of Swayambhu, but looking from a more religious cosmological perspective. She talked about the emergence of the stupa itself, the symbolic meanings of various statues, various gods and deities around the stupa, and what that meant for people in the past, and what kinds of issues are emerging, especially after the earthquake and the reconstruction process has taken place. But Anil's perspective on Swayambhu was also equally interesting because Swayambhu is where he's from. So he not only provides his knowledge from various readings that he has done over the years, but also over the generations, his ancestors, how did they come and how are they connected to Swayambhu. So those were the kinds of things he shared with the group. And I think both the India-China Institute fellows and the Kailash Cartographies participant really enjoyed and learned a lot from the Swayambhu walk.
Swayambhu, the whole idea is probably the oldest and the most revered, Buddhist site. And so there we try to look at iconography, we try to look at the rituals. We also try to look at, how people have been going there every day to basically live what we would call everyday religion. And so to really observe, how people live their life around Swayambhu.
The fourth day, on Thursday, we had a walk/visit inside the Isimod Knowledge Park at Godavari. This was organized in a way to also give the participants some idea about how environmental issues are being dealt with and to connect the nature and the urban ideas and concepts in order to understand an urban city like Kathmandu, for example. What was really good about this walk inside the Knowledge Park was the fact that it was led by somebody from Isimod in charge of the Knowledge Park itself, who had knowledge about not only what the park has to offer, but also what are the various experiments the park has allowed to take place, which can be replicated in other areas. The final day was Friday. What was important about that day was we did not have any walks, but this was the conclusion of our entire week. On Friday, the highlight was the reception, the dinner reception at NexUs, and we had around 80 people who attended the reception. And the reception was attended by the participants and the fellows, obviously, but also the assistants, the various volunteers who have been involved in this entire process from the beginning.
I think it's really inspiring to be here, cross-discipline, with to meet other writers, artists, scholars who are interested in similar topics. By seeing the project, it seems like everyone had a really productive trip, so it's really inspiring.
are from this region itself. I mean, it is our home, whereas so many of other artists and writers, like they were coming into Kathmandu the very first time and looking at the very different perspective, you know. So that was interesting, how they were looking at and how we are looking at, and it's how we can collaborate with the artists. That whole process was very interesting. And 5 days is not really enough to produce anything. So how I see this whole week or the time is really, it's about either someone who has already started, it's kind of work in progress, or someone, it's kind of like really a seeding, you know, it could come as a really beautiful fruit or flowers. I mean, however it is going to blossom, that is really different. But it's kind of the meeting, the conversation, how it began is really wonderful. And being all the creative mind together, definitely something will come. Everybody, you know, every artist, writers, or the thinkers, like however they came together, and the seed is already, you know, there. So it will be kind of really taking into different forms, which we don't know yet.
It's been a very fertile ground to have all these artists kind of plant their ideas in this landscape in the last week, and we'll have to wait and see what actually grows to fruition in the weeks and, you know, even the years to come. I mean, these are contacts which I think are quite strong.